Okay, so the verse today is 1 Timothy 2:8 through 9, and it says this: I desire then that in every place the man should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. Likewise, also that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold or pearly or costly attire. Now, there are some super important things that you need to pull out of this to really get a good context. But on top of that, we also just need to be honest about the fact that it's not quite fair, right? We can't just fly over that and make all these contextual arguments for why, oh, well, they meant this and they meant that, and women are great. We don't. No, no, no. To a degree, the Bible has a sexist undertone. There is absolutely, both, in my opinion, a true and godly undertone of gender roles, where men have a specific role and where women have a specific role. But at the same time, there are also undertones of just a cold reality that within the cultures, within the geography of where they were, but primarily just the time period in the culture, women were not seen as fully equal to men. And in many of those ways, I disagree. And in some of those ways, I do agree. And the ones that I agree with are specifically godly gender roles. And the ones I don't agree with are the ones where we simply didn't put women at an equal standing of value necessarily. I don't agree with that. I believe that women are of equal value. I agree they're of different value, but it is not any more or less than men. I truly mean that. But I do mean different. It is different. So this right here in Timothy, and in most of what we read about in Timothy that seems to turn people off in terms of women, this is a description of women within a Christian worship context, right? Specifically, a Christian worship context. So when in a group setting, right, that you have Christians gathering together for church, right, for ecclesia, what is a woman's purpose or function within that specific context? The term hoseautos, the pronunciation might be off. It's not one I'm very familiar with, but the meaning is likewise. And that's when we read that likewise, also women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel, yada, yada, yada. When it's used there, we need to pay attention to that. So women are to share in similar, Paul says, godlike actions as men within a church setting, within that group ecclesia setting. The specific mention, again, is of prayer. That was at the beginning. Men should pray. I desire that in every place the man should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. Likewise, women are to do X, Y, and Z. So it's considered by most theologians to be more of a specific application rather than a unique principle, if that makes sense. However, within this context primarily of how women are to dress and care for their hair within a worship context, the church settings they're not settings, they weren't settings, and they still aren't settings for seductive, sexual, or attention-seeking type of behavior or clothing, right? That seems apparent, it seems obvious, and in my view, that's of men or women, because men are equally as guilty, if not more, in my personal experience, of wearing attention-seeking type things or behaving in attention-seeking type ways. However, biologically, we need to consider these factors, right? When you realize the cold, hard reality that men are physical creatures drawn towards sexual desires at a very heavy rate, at a much higher rate normally than any woman on the planet, right? Most men are much more physically drawn to a woman, whereas most women are more emotionally drawn to a man. Does he spark your emotion? Does he pique your emotion? Does he pique your interest in that more emotional way? Whereas men, at least initially, are drawn to a woman with their eyes drawn because of how she looks, what she's wearing, It's just, it just is what it is. And we can quarrel about it and we can be pissy about it, but it's just the reality. Men are much more physically drawn as creatures. It's just who we are. So women were not supposed to be concerned with braided hair in this specific context. Now, you please remember that culture is absolutely number one. We have to consider culture before anything else. What was the culture? What would Paul possibly be meaning within that specific context and that specific culture when we interpret any of this stuff? It's what we have to do. So hairstyles themselves obviously are not sinful, right? That would be silly. But it's about the message, and it's about the intention, and it's about the condition of the heart. This is why with me, I constantly tell you guys, what is your condition of the heart? You guys ask me all the time, well, can I do this and can I do that? And blah, blah, blah. And my answer is always going to be adiaphora. Man, like, I don't know. What is the condition of your heart? What are your intentions? Why are you doing it? Why do you want to do it? I've been asked recently a lot about like nose piercings for some reason. It's definitely not a sin. Why do you want to do it? Is it just to seek attention? Is it because it provides you something emotionally that is pure? One might be okay. One might not necessarily be okay. What are your intentions? Back then in Ephesus and other cultures, in the area, braided hair was a richy, flashy, and sometimes a seductive type sexy style. It was. So it kind of makes sense that it's being singled out here, right? So think about in today's culture, if a woman spends $150 to have a stylist do her hair and makeup before she goes to church, but even if we remove the seductive idea out of it, right? This type of self-absorbed, self-concerned, self-obsessed behavior is not seen as proper in a Christian context at all. It's just not. You're so concerned about yourself. You're so concerned about the attention that you could draw. You're so concerned about people looking at you that you would spend that kind of money. Because remember, even in the verse, monetary means are a part of the context. So it's a part that you need to consider. Our focus and finances could certainly be used on more important things, right? Which is the kind of general idea that Paul's getting at, especially back then, again, and especially Paul within the early church. There was a lot of charity, right? And there were a lot of early Christians who gave up everything, gave up all their monetary stuff or a good portion of it, and then gave the money to something good, gave the money to the church to do something good with, because at least back then they were doing good things with it. So it makes sense when you consider Paul also focused on clothing and jewelry being this improper use of money when it could be used to help somebody. Now, I get at the same time, we could say that now, right? We could say, right here, I have these computers, I have all sorts of, nice things. We have these cell phones, we don't need them. We could get a cheaper cell phone, but we get them. So are we living in that same type of sin? I would honestly argue, yes. It's no different. However, you will get more traditional Christians that tell you, oh, no, it's different. And they'll give you an array of reasons. Well, no, it's really not. It's really not. If the argument in the context is that the braids were seen as a rich, kind of showy, flashy, and possibly, but much less so, slightly seductive style to try to get attention, we're doing nothing different. So it's really hard to single that person out for what they're doing when we do similar things. And I'd put it like this too, is the way where men interact with this issue in a same or similar way, I would say, is guys who require to have a flashy car and then they drive and flaunt that car at church. Guys who wear expensive chains or do their hair expensively. Plenty of guys do that. It's no different because the context is money, attention-seeking behavior, and sexual attention. So sexual promiscuity, seductive type appearances, which is again just to attract to that kind of attention, right? Which is just attention-seeking behavior. So we can really boil it down to money. What are you spending your money on? Could you be spending it somewhere better? And attention-seeking behavior. Are you seeking attention in the way that you dress, in the way that you're putting yourself out there? I would argue most people do both, at least to some degree, because we all live at some level of monetary means that is unnecessary. And that money could absolutely go to helping someone who really needed it, or into a charity, or you could save the money and just be better off financially. It's either way, most Americans at the very least are guilty of this. It's just a fact, right? And at the same time, many of us drive cars we don't need to. Many of us drive cars because they're cool, right? And many of us dress in a way that is, if it's not to attract attention, it's to promote a certain image of yourself. And all of that, the attention seeking, all of that boils down to what are your intentions. I like wearing button-up shirts. I like wearing like nice dress shirts. I do it for two reasons, and I'll be very transparent about this. I do it because it genuinely makes me feel like, one, kind of more of a professional, more to be taken more serious, because, and part of that is to offset, I'm heavily tattooed. I regret a lot of my tattoos, not all of them, but a lot of them. And I got them when I was very young. I was not even 18 yet when I got most of them. So it was a young choice. So now as I've gotten older and I've gone into professional careers and I've managed companies and things, I want to come across as more professional. I'm not seeking attention with it, though. That's the truth of my heart, is I'm not seeking attention with it. However, Kat, my spouse, really likes me in button-up shirts also. So with her, my intention is to seek attention from her. I very much like the way she looks at me. I like the comments that she makes. And because I'm in a relationship with her, that's not bad. However, if I wasn't, and I was seeking that kind of, whether it's sexual or not, which sometimes it's one, sometimes it's the other, sometimes it's both. If I wasn't in the committed relationship I am, then that could be considered as wrong, right? So there have been times in my life, absolutely, where I've dressed in ways to kind of seek attention, wanting to look good, and I wasn't in a committed relationship. That would be no different. That would be no different. There were also times in my life where I had a bunch of motorcycles. I was a big motorcycle guy for a while before my daughter was born, and then I sold all of them. There were times where it felt good getting the attention I got riding a motorcycle to the church, right? Again, just full transparency, full honesty. It felt good sometimes, right? That is attention-seeking behavior, and that is wrong. And I'm very thankful that's something I've fully grown out of. But that's no different than the comments that Paul is making here about the women with the braided hair and the jewelry and the clothing. The only difference is the sexual aspect, but take sexual out of it, it's still just as wrong, right? If you're doing things to seduce people, it's on a slightly different level, but either way, you're in the wrong, right? So church is not a nightclub, is really what it is at the end of the day. Essentially, women and men shouldn't be more concerned with their appearance and their flashy attire, as they should, about the reason that they're going to church. Church is supposed to be you going somewhere to collectively, as a group, as an ecclesia, to worship God, to not worship self, to not be concerned about self, to not be concerned about getting attention, to not be concerned about looking cool or coming across a certain way. It's to worship God, right? That's it. That's all. It's not a social club. It's not a nightclub. It's not where we meet chicks. Sometimes that happens, but it shouldn't be why you're going. It shouldn't be the reason. It shouldn't be the condition of your heart for why you're going to the church. These things could distract not only ourselves, but they could obviously distract anyone and everyone who is around us. It's, what are your intentions? Why are you doing it? That is what has the potential to make something wrong or to make something neutral. That is the difference. Now, there's definitely a lot more to dig out of Timothy. So don't come at me like, oh, you didn't cover this and you didn't cover that. And what about this? Yeah, I'm just covering this very small aspect of it. Okay, we're in the Bible study, 6 p.m. every Sunday, Central Time on YouTube. We do a live Bible study. If you want to get into that Bible study, I will leave a link in the description for the Discord. You can also go to tattootheist.com. We will eventually go through both of the epistles to Timothy, and we will rip them apart, verse by verse, word by word, and go through all of the context of everything. So this is not what that is. This is a very brief overlook of this one section and this one aspect. But get in our Bible study. We do this for virtually every verse in the Bible. And right now we're finishing Acts. And then we're going to go to Second Corinthians and we're going to keep it rolling. But this stuff is really important to understand because otherwise it can get a lot of people upset. It can hurt a lot of feelings and it can confuse a lot of people. So please, please, you have to start trying to really understand what was going on then, because these issues were happening. And that is what Paul is addressing. Now, again, I would argue today it's no different. We just don't address it because we don't want to hurt women's feelings and we don't want to put men down as if they're doing it just as much when they absolutely are. It just looks different. It's no different. We need to contextually read the Bible. We need to be exegetically honest. I love you guys. I'll see you next time.